your recording? All right, thank you. Well, I am going to go ahead and hit record, and we are live. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day and your busy schedules to join us here this morning. My name is Maya Burtin, and I am the Outreach and Prevention Education Coordinator here at UMKC. I work in the RISE office, which stands for Resources, Intervention, Support, and Education. As we get started today, I'm just going to ask Casey Atchison, who is our guest speaker here with us from the Title IX office, to introduce herself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Casey Atchison. I'm the Manager of Investigations and Supportive Measures for the Office of Affirmative Action here at UMKC. I also serve as a Deputy Title IX Coordinator, and I coordinate the university's conflict management program.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you for being with us here and sharing your time with us today.
Absolutely.
Before we get started, I want to let folks know that this is very informal. It's just a very informal conversational way to get to know exactly what Title IX is and what the folks that work in the Title IX office do, as well as learning a little bit about some UMKC policies and procedures. So I invite folks, if you have your drink of choice, whether that be tea, water, coffee, whatever, please join us with that. If you have food, that's fine as well. Kim's got hers, I've got my water. And we also invite you, if you have any questions throughout this event for the next hour or so, feel free to put those questions in the chat. And I will be monitoring the chat so that way we can address those. Feel free to raise your hand, whatever you'd like to do, so that way you can ask your question and it can get answered. So Casey, the first question that I have for you is, would you be able to tell us exactly what the Office of Affirmative Action and Title IX office does at UMKC, maybe sharing some goals and the mission of the office with us?
Yeah, so in short, our office handles all the issues that students, faculty, or staff may have when it comes to equity and Title IX. Our mission and goals really revolve around making sure that everyone, students, faculty, staff, whether you're getting your education here or working here, you have equal opportunity, you feel safe and comfortable, and it's just a very inclusive environment. That's what we strive to do. And in so doing, we make sure that the university is in compliance with equity laws. So I don't know if you want me to get into a little bit of detail kind of about how we do that. We receive the reports of discrimination and harassment, and we enforce all the university's protected status policies. So as you can maybe see on the screen there, the university prohibits discrimination or harassment against anyone on the basis of race, color, national origin, ancestry, religion, sex, pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, disability, or protected veteran status. And I've put them in two columns. I know we're talking about Title IX mostly today, but since we do both, I thought it would be helpful to kind of differentiate the two categories there. On the Title IX column, of course, we have sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, which includes sexual assault, stalking, dating or domestic violence, and sexual exploitation. And so we manage all those reports. Another thing we do is provide some training for departments on inclusiveness, equal opportunity in hiring practices, training on disability accommodations, and mandated reporting, especially when it comes to Title IX.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit more detail about what exactly you all do. Before we move into our next question, if folks have any questions about the work that you all do or how investigations take place, or maybe have something that they'd like to report, whether it be regarding equity or the Title IX side, how would they go about getting in contact with your office or filing a report?
Definitely. Let me switch back to our website. So if you would like to make a report, there's a few different ways you can do that. You can go to, if you just Google UMKC Equity in Title IX, or even UMKC Title IX, it'll get you right here. Click on Making a Report. This page will provide some links, and it gives you a little explanation of what falls under each category. But honestly, if you report under any reporting form, it'll get to us and we'll sort it out. So you can do it online. You can do it anonymously. There's a spot at the top. Let's see if I can just show you here. It gives you a lot of information, so you can kind of read through that, make sure you understand what you're doing, who's seeing the report, which is really just us to start with. And then this first part here, background information, you don't have to fill that out if you don't want to. So if you do want to remain anonymous, you certainly can. And then you get down here where you're going to talk about who's involved and then what happened. So that's one way to make a report. Another way, you can just reach out and contact us. We've got all of our information here. And I think we'll talk about in a little bit when we talk about the Title IX coordinator role maybe, but Sybil Wyatt is our Title IX coordinator. And we have email and phone. And here's my information, email and phone. We have another investigator, Lacey Fox. And then we have our equity assistant, Christy Roeder, and anyone is welcome to call or email any of us at any time. When we're not having COVID precautions, we're in the office as well, and anyone can walk in during business hours, which are typically 9 to 5. Right now, we're not staffing the office regularly for precautionary reasons, but we do have an on-call person every day, and this phone number right here, the 235-1771, that'll be routed to whoever's on call for the day. And we keep our phone line open and available. We don't take other meetings, so that we can respond right away or within 5 minutes if we happen to be on another call.
Thank you for sharing that information with us. That's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
On call every single day, so that way if anybody has any questions or needs assistance filling out the report, they can get a hold of somebody each day.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So would you be able to share with us a little bit more about your specific role in the office and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, definitely. So my main role is investigator. That's probably what takes up the big bulk of my time, although I've recently acquired a new position as manager of investigations and supportive measures. So right now I help oversee the work that is done once we receive a report or open an investigation. In addition to doing my own investigative work, I make sure things are getting done as they need to be, and then I report back or consult with Sybil Wyatt, our Title IX coordinator, as needed. I want to point out, I feel like the supportive measures part is really important. Anyone can receive this type of assistance if they've been affected by discrimination or harassment, and you don't have to file a formal complaint or have an investigation to receive these services. What these are, I'm going to scroll down a bit, just kind of show you some examples. A lot of times we'll get a report, and someone has experienced some kind of harassment or misconduct, but they really don't want to go through the whole investigative process. So, we just try to see, what is it that you need right now? Are you safe? What can we do? Can we refer you maybe over to RISE, to your office, to do some safety plans? We can get UMKC PD involved if you need some safety escorts on campus. We do referrals to counseling. I do a lot of work with faculty when a student, for example, is going through obviously what is an incredibly difficult time, and it's unthinkable sometimes to focus on your education, unfortunately, and we want to kind of put as much assistance to kind of prevent that educational gap from happening. And so I work with a lot of faculty, and we don't tell them what's happened. I just say, hey, this person is working with my office, and we need to maybe ask for some flexible attendance requirements for this period of time, or flexible deadlines on assignments. So that's a big bulk of what I do when I'm not actually investigating. When I am investigating, switch. So I do a lot of these activities here. With most reports, we'll start at the top. We do what we call an intake meeting with the complainant, and that's what we call the person who may have been affected by discrimination, harassment, or misconduct. So in this meeting, I listen to the individual if they want to share what happened, as much or as little as they want to talk about. I might ask a few clarifying questions to determine if we're talking about something that could be a policy violation or if it's something else and I should refer this person to a different office. Again, people can share as much or as little as they want to. And then we can talk about next steps. We'll talk about what type of resolution options are available. What does the person want to see as a resolution? Is that feasible? How would that work? Is it a formal investigation or maybe an informal approach? We can kind of visit all of those possibilities. And then we also talk about that assistance, the supportive measures that I showed you on the screen before. If we do proceed into an investigation, parties get a notice in a form of a letter. It gives them all the information about the process, policies, what was alleged to have happened, who is the investigator, either myself or Lacey. And so then I'm scheduling interviews. I'm talking to the respondent, and that's what we call the person who is accused of violating a policy. Gives them a chance to respond. I interview any witnesses there might be. We collect any evidence that's available. And once we've completed all of that, the interview process, if there's follow-up interviews, we may have to go back and forth a couple times with certain parties if we're learning new information. And then I want to come back to you, the complainant, and say, okay, well, so-and-so just said this. Do you want to respond? Do you want to give me a little more info here? Once we've done all of that, got all the evidence we can, we put all of that information into an investigative report. And that will summarize basically what was said to have happened, all the information we could gather about it, and all the exhibits. The complainant and respondent do get a chance to look at that report. They can review it, they can respond it. They have a period of time in which they can do that. And we can add anything additional that they might want to add as far as information or evidence. And then I finalize that report and I give it to our Title IX coordinator. There's two more things that I think are really important to note about an investigator. We are required to remain neutral and act solely as fact finders gathering information. So we can't take sides or act as a support person or an advocate for either party, which is why we have, offices such as yours, Maya, which are excellent at providing that advocacy, because people definitely need that. We do also, we try to help people connect with people who can give them support and advocacy. But we just have to make sure that we're facilitating that help, but not crossing the line in any way to fall on one side or the other, because we're really just supposed to be collecting information. We also don't have any role in the decision-making process, and we don't make any recommendations to, say, the Title IX coordinator, or if there's a hearing panel, we don't give them a recommendation as to how a case should be decided. It's purely informational.
Okay. I have two follow-up questions about that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit, the first question is, can you tell us a little bit about who makes the decisions or how decisions are made? And then secondly, would you be able to share from start to finish, from the time you receive a report to the time that a decision is made, whichever person or individuals make that decision, how long that process takes?
Yeah, those are some really good questions. And I wish I had a visual, because the decision-making process is kind of tricky. It depends on the type of case that you have. So since we're talking about Title IX primarily, I'm going to start with that. We did, I don't know if many people are aware, we did have some recent new Title IX regulations that came out from the Department of Education effective August 14th. So we're working, it's a little bit of a different process. Any case that falls under that jurisdiction for Title IX, and those are the sexual harassment, the sexual assault, if they happened in the United States, and if they rise to the level that they are severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive acts, then they are required to have a hearing as a decision-making mode. So the parties would be required to participate in a hearing that we hold over Zoom. So they're not in person, they're not face-to-face, but it is on Zoom. The hearing panel is made up of 3 faculty and staff members from the university. We have 2 alternates, so there's usually going to be 5 people there, I think. And we make sure that those are individuals who do not have a conflict of interest with any, there's not a student that's in their class, for example, nothing like that. We give the parties the names of the panelists in advance so they can look at that and say, oh no, that's my advisor. I really don't want them to be deciding this. So we make sure that that's all, there's no conflict of interest. And then the other option, if you don't have a case that falls under Title IX, for example, let's say you have been sexually harassed, but it didn't, and I did forget, I apologize. The new Title IX regulations require the conduct to be on campus as well. I'm sorry. So on our campus in the United States, not study abroad. So if you have something where, say, you were sexually harassed, but it was not on campus and it was not part of any UMKC sponsored function, but it was another UMKC student that did it, we can still handle that as a possible policy violation under our equity policy. And we will still treat it the same that we did before. Under the equity policy, you would have an option. Both the complainant and the respondent can choose if they want an administrative resolution or a hearing panel. It does default to a hearing panel if one person chooses hearing panel. Administrative resolution is essentially our director, the Title IX coordinator, and she's also the equity officer, Sybil Wyatt, would go ahead and make a finding on the case. So she would review the report and then make a decision. I think that answered the first part of your question.
Yes.
Second part is, the timeline. It is unfortunately a really long process if you're going to go through a full investigation. We've had a goal for 30 days for the investigation, another 30, and these are business days, another 30 business days for a resolution if it's an administrative resolution. Hearing panels, for obvious reasons, will take longer because we have to get our panelists together. They have to prepare and review the materials, and we have to arrange for all the witnesses to show up on Zoom at certain times. So that takes a lot more effort. And currently our office is very busy. So we're doing the best we can, but it does tend to take longer than those 60 business days at this point. And so, I think we're looking at, what is that? That would typically be like 2 or 3 months. We've got some, unfortunately, that are going longer, and it's not something that, we're happy about. It's kind of just the position that we're in at the moment. And so we're working really hard. Hopefully at some point, we get additional staff if we're allowed to have that. That'd be great. But we're really doing the best we can. On equity, I think there is a 120 business day. It may just be a 120 day limit. And so those, we can really make sure that those are done in a much more compact manner. Also because those don't always require the hearing. So those are our timelines. They're really not, it's not a quick process, unfortunately. I wish it was, I wish it could be. It just doesn't work out that way for a lot of reasons.
That's understandable. From what you're sharing with us, excuse me, it sounds like there's a lot of different moving pieces that can change at any given time. And so it sounds like that's a little bit why it's taking a little bit longer. Witnesses, the interviews, you have to do follow-up interviews and gather all the investigative facts.
Yeah, and we have timelines that we try to stick to, like it's a big goal to make sure that we talk to that respondent within 5 days of issuing the notice, because, nobody wants to be sitting out there wondering what's going on. and we have to make sure that we're treating the parties, equitably. And on the other side, a complainant doesn't want us to take forever to get to figure out, what happened, how are we going to resolve this? So we do have those timelines, but a lot of delays can come up if people don't respond to our requests for interviews, and we have to really reach out to them several times. That's a big one. Scheduling difficulties, getting someone to talk to us. Sometimes they'll be like, I'm not available for 2 weeks, and there's really not a lot we can do. We can't force someone to come in at a certain time. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that information with us. I'm definitely learning a lot about the process. And I hope some of our participants are learning a little bit too, especially with the changes that have occurred recently. Can you tell us a little bit about how policies for misconduct are determined, or who makes the policies that we follow as an institution?
Yeah. So our policies, they're determined based on a few factors. There are requirements of federal and state law. The Title IX coordinators for all 4 system schools work together with our system Title IX coordinator and deputy coordinator and the Office of General Counsel at the system level, and they implement best practices when drafting these policies and procedures, taking into consideration the laws. For example, we have, the law Title IX that we're talking about. That law is enforced in part by the Department of Education for the federal government, and they will issue regulations to schools that in some areas will tell us what our policies have to say, certain things that we have to provide. In other areas, they'll offer some guidance. Something's not required, but it's a suggestion on how things will be done. And so, our system group takes that into consideration. For example, if we're going to talk about like an equity or an employment policy, we also have to make sure we're in compliance with another law, which is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And that's enforced in part by the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They also provide some guidance on how to interpret those laws. And so when we're making the policies, they have to look at what laws are we bound to, what do we have to comply with? Okay, what are the best practices, and how should we be treating students, taking care of our students, faculty, and staff, and kind of just combine it all. And then, of course, they also have to look at court precedent, to see if someone has filed a lawsuit on a certain issue. And did a court say, no, you've got to do it this way, university. And so that gets written into policy as well. So it's a really complicated process. I could geek out on it all day long, but not everyone does. I completely get that. So yeah, it's kind of the easiest explanation I can give you there.
Thank you for sharing. It's good to know what goes into making our policies. And it sounds like, again, there's a lot of different moving pieces and a lot of different laws that need to be followed to ensure that we as a system and separately as UMKC are in compliance with all of those pieces.
Definitely.
So I know we've talked a little bit about the Title IX coordinator. And I know you also said that our Title IX coordinator is also involved in making policies for the system as a whole, but also for UMKC. Who is UMKC's Title IX coordinator? And can you tell us a little bit about their role and how someone can go about contacting that individual?
Absolutely. So I really wish I had a picture to put up here. Our Title IX coordinator is Dr. Sybil Wyatt. She's amazing. Her role in a nutshell is to respond to these reports or either directly or have another member of our team do it. And then she assists with the process of, kind of overseeing our investigation of any formal complaints and, the supportive measures. Like if I'm helping students with something and I have a question about the best way to go about that or who should they contact, I always turn to her and she helps us navigate that. She also maintains all the information and data about reports that we receive. gives that information, reports back to the chancellor and provost upon request. And she's always got to keep them in the loop and communicate, how things are going here at UMKC, making sure our campus is safe, making sure everyone's provided with equal educational or employment experiences. Sybil herself does a lot more than that. Those are her primary Title IX roles, I would say. I think I mentioned earlier, she's also the university equity officer. So like I said, she might be making the finding on some of those equity cases. And for contact, again, we have the website and we have this information here. You can call, you can email any of us, but if you want to talk to her directly, this is her information, her email and phone number. A lot of times, she's super busy, as we all are. So sometimes she'll say, hey, Casey, can you reach out to this person and follow up? And I'll be happy to do that. And then, sometimes people are like, no, I really want to talk to Sybil. And I say, that's totally fine. I will let her know she is in demand and we'll get you in as soon as possible. Again, if it's, non-COVID times, you can just stop in the office and see if she's available. So yeah, any one of us can get you put into Sybil if you really need it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Casey. I want to follow up on something that you mentioned. You said that part of Sybil's role is to provide information about reports or the number of reports to the chancellor and provost upon their request. Is there a way for UMKC students, faculty, and staff to access the same information or similar information about how many reports the office gets in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm going to take you to that on our website. If I can find the right, I will say one amazing thing that Sybil did while we're on the topic of her is she just revamped this website recently, and it has a wealth of information. So I am sometimes still learning where everything is. But yeah, here, this tab, data and research, you can come on here and find annual reports and surveys, I think. And some of this was under construction, so I don't know if it's posted yet or not. Yes, it is. Of course it is. So here's where you can see annual reports. And this gives you all that information about, what type of reports did we receive? How many were student related? How many were employee? And so it's all broken down really, really well in those.
Okay. Anybody can access this just on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to our website, just do UMKC Title IX, and then you'll find that data and research.
Awesome. That is great to know. So that way anybody can find out what you all are doing, what's going on campus at any time.
Yeah, and I will say we put them out annually, so you won't have like up to the date information. Like it just, I think it started, we have like the 2019, 2020, or that might be what they're working on right now. And that'll be issued in this coming month, I believe. So it's looking back a year or so. For more current information, I'm not sure, you might have to make some kind of request that would have to go through some channels to see if we have it available, or we would have to put it together to release. So that might involve like a sunshine request, if anyone's familiar with that. So,
okay. Thank you, Casey. That's great to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we are talking about Title IX, and we've also talked about equity, since that's a piece that your office does as well. So with all this talk about Title IX and Title IX policies, what exactly is Title IX? Can you share with us a little bit about what Title IX is?
Sure. So here, this is the law right here. Oh, I can't see it all. Let me scroll over. I'm sorry. There we go. So Title IX is actually a portion of the Education Amendments of 1972. So that was a bill that was passed to amend several earlier bills that dealt with education, such as the Higher Education Act of 1965, the Vocational Education Act of 1963, and some others. I mentioned the Civil Rights Act of 1964 earlier, and that protects people against discrimination or harassment in employment. So there was a parallel law also enacted in 1964 called Title VI. that prohibited discrimination and harassment in education, but just for reasons of race, color, or national origin. It did not include sex. So Title IX was enacted initially to cover this gap, and so that all private or public institutions that receive any federal funds are subject to compliance with this law. So the law in its entirety is super short, but it's really evolved and enlarged in its scope over time. And I can kind of go on and explain that if you want.
Yeah, feel free. Whatever information you
Okay.
can share, that would be great.
Yeah. So these are similar to, I think, those columns that I had up before. We have that initial interpretation where Title IX strictly prohibits discrimination based on sex. So as the law says, you can't be excluded from receiving an education because you're a woman, for example. You can't be subject to discrimination, which basically just means, one or more persons are being treated differently from others, if the reason that they're being treated differently is sex. So for example, if a teacher allows only women to speak up in class, or maybe is providing outside class assistance only to men, that would be illegal sex discrimination and fall under Title IX. So as I mentioned, the legal definition of what is covered under sex discrimination has been expanded by courts over time, and the Department of Education under previous administrations would include pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, considering those all to fall under that umbrella of sex-related discrimination. We also would consider acts of sexual harassment or the sexual misconduct as sex-based discrimination because it is affecting someone based on their sex. That's one reason if you look at the policies, and I didn't put it on this picture here, but if you see in the policy, it will define stalking on the basis of sex. So it is differentiated from just, stalking someone just because you're obsessed with them, but it has nothing to do with the fact that you have an attraction or, anything like that. So we do differentiate that. So it still falls under that sex-based conduct umbrella. So as I mentioned earlier, in August of this year, the federal government did make some changes to our regulations. So now our current Title IX policy covers, like I said, only those acts of sexual harassment or sexual assault, dating or domestic violence, stalking, if they happened in the United States, if they happened on campus or at a UMKC sponsored activity off campus, and if they meet that legal threshold there, which is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. Now, that's a pretty high bar to meet, unfortunately, legally. So we as a system decided that, just because something may not be severe and pervasive and objectively offensive doesn't mean that we should be allowing our students or employees to be engaging in that behavior against others, which is why anything that doesn't fall under that Title IX policy, but, for the reasons of it was off campus, or perhaps it wasn't pervasive, but it was severe, then we can look at it under our equity policy and still handle it. So I think that's kind of another complicated explanation. It's fun when they throw some twists in the law at us like that, but we adjust and move on.
Well, this is a lot of information to take in, but it's very useful information, for all of us to know, especially with the changes. So just to make sure I heard you correctly, so it has to occur, so all of these things fall under the scope of Title IX, but in terms of sexual assault, stalking, or dating, or domestic violence, or acts of violence, they have to be, any of these things, equity or violent acts, have to be severe, pervasive, or offensive and occur on campus or on campus property. But
Yeah.
if not, you can go the equity route if it doesn't meet all of those standards and guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one slight correction, which is just because it just changed, it has to be the severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, like all three, to fall under Title IX now. So that's what made it. It used to be, our policy used to be severe, pervasive, or, like you said. And so now, like I said, maybe somebody, I'll use this example of, so maybe we have two coworkers in, a department, and one of them just keeps coming up and casually brushing up against the other one's backside. So it could have been an accident, right? Like, you're not really sure what is going on here. So that legally would not be considered severe. But, now if it's, even though I will definitely say that may feel very severe to the person experiencing it. Unfortunately, the law has to take that, subjective part out of it. So the law would say that's not severe, that's not objectively offensive. But if that happens every day or even once a week, and this person is like, what is going on? Why does this keep happening to me? This cannot be an accident. This has to be intentional. That's where we get pervasive. It's continuing over and over. And so we can still look at that report and figure out, under our equity policy, does it meet the threshold there to be a violation? And should this employee receive some discipline for what they're doing, after we do the investigation? So that's kind of one example maybe of how we have to, so we do a lot of, there's going to be, I think, a lot of shifting between like, where does this fall? But fortunately, we have to worry about it, but everyone else really doesn't, because either way, we're going to figure out if there was a policy violation and then take it from there. So I don't know if that was helpful to explain.
Yes, that was very helpful. So even if somebody reports something that may not fall under one policy, you all will take that, look at the information, and see which policy it could fall under. It could fall under a different policy.
Yep. Yep. That's kind of what I do with almost every report. If it's not clear cut, I just, get as much information as I can. A lot of times go back to Sybil and say, what are we looking at here? What are the options? So that I can then go back to that complainant and say, we can do an investigation under our equity policy, or we can do an investigation under Title IX, because, as I think I mentioned earlier, the way that those are resolved are different. And so I always want to make sure that I can give that complainant and respondent accurate information about what the investigation is going to look like. What is their resolution going to look like? Do you have to have a hearing, or can you choose administrative? So yeah, there's a lot involved, but we just want to make sure that, we can give everyone accurate information for their case.
Right. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So we know what falls under the scope of Title IX, but who exactly is Title IX meant to protect?
So really, it is meant to protect everyone who's a student, an employee, or even a visitor at UMKC. So anyone who is or any university, obviously, but for our purposes, UMKC here, anyone who's participating in an educational or activity that's offered here, anyone who's employed here at UMKC, and they're all protected from discrimination based on sex and all those other actions that fall under that. For general purposes, it's any school that receives federal funding is subject to Title IX. And so their students, employees, and visitors should be protected under that policy, under that law as well.
Okay. And do both individuals have to be associated with UMKC? So let's say there's somebody who may be a victim of domestic violence who works at UMKC, but maybe their partner does not work at UMKC and isn't affiliated with UMKC in any way. Or maybe a student who attends classes at UMKC, even virtually now, but their partner is not associated with UMKC, and they may be being abused at home or being abused by their partner. If somebody finds out about that information, would they still be able to make a report? Would they be protected under the Title IX policies?
So that's a really good question, because this happens quite a lot, actually. They can definitely still make a report. There is a thing called jurisdiction. So if the respondent is not affiliated with UMKC in any way, we don't have any jurisdiction meaning over them, meaning we cannot investigate. We can't issue, I mean, I guess we could investigate, let me back up there. We could investigate to the extent that we're able to get information, but we couldn't issue any finding or sanctions that they would be bound by because we don't really have any power over them in that way. But definitely the complainant can still make a report, and we will definitely still look into supportive measures. One thing that we can do, in some cases have done, is issue no trespass orders. So a respondent who's not affiliated with us in any way is told that they're not allowed to come on campus. And we've done that in cases when someone unaffiliated has been, harassing or stalking or committing intimate partner violence against a member of our community. So that is a possibility. We can protect our physical jurisdiction and our jurisdiction of our activities, even virtually when it comes to like Zoom and stuff like that, but not issue any other findings that would, be discipline or affect, obviously, because they're not getting their education here or they're not employed here. If it's the flip side, however, yes, if the complainant is not affiliated with UMKC, but say their spouse is an employee and there is, or ex-spouse, and there's a stalking situation going on, they can definitely make a report. We have to then look at it as an office, as a university, because a complainant who's not affiliated with the university, they can't file their own formal complaint in most cases. So then we look at it and say, do we have enough information here? Does it look like we really do need to investigate this because there may be a policy violation? And we can still go ahead then and do that. And we kind of issue a university as complainant investigation. So it would be kind of, UMKC is leading the way on that. So we can do that. Sometimes if it doesn't if it doesn't look like it would be a policy violation, but it's still concerning behavior, especially when we're talking about employees, we do still take some form of action in which we want to address it with the employee because obviously we don't tolerate employees, violating the policies. And if you're coming close, we're definitely going to say, hey, we're getting reports and this behavior is unacceptable. And I will add, a caveat on that if it has to do with intimate partner violence and it's a safety situation, we always take that into consideration, because a lot of times someone will say the report will get to us, but they don't want us to do anything for their own safety. And we definitely take that into consideration. So.
Okay. And just because I'm getting a couple of questions in the chat, I want to make sure
Yeah.
that I address their questions, although I think you just addressed most of them. So the person so let's say a respondent is affiliated with the university in some capacity, with the example you provided, but the victim is not affiliated with the university. UMKC can still investigate that based on what you mentioned earlier in your explanation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can. So, like I said, we're going to look at what we have and we'll communicate with that complainant as much as they want to as well, as much as they want to interact with us and see what information we can have. And if we can get enough to do an investigation, and if there needs to be some kind of sanction, then if the finding finds that they violated the policy, then that may be the appropriate next course. Okay.
And let's say a respondent is associated with UMKC in some capacity or a complainant, and they don't necessarily want to report to law enforcement, but they want to report it to your office. Could this be another route for them? Could they come and talk to you about the situation and explain what's going on, and that information not go to law enforcement or UMKC PD?
Yeah, we actually don't report information to UMKC PD with personal details. We have to provide certain aggregate data, just how many, there's a law, it's called the Clery Act, and it requires schools to report on certain acts of violence. So we have to give data on that, but we don't give them information that's details about who's involved. I think the only exception to that might be if we have someone that we believe is actively dangerous in the moment on our campus. There have been cases where in our office, we personally as employees are getting threats from someone. And in that case, we do report to law enforcement the threats, and we do say we're working with this person in this capacity. But even then, we didn't give the full report that the complainant had made to us about what had happened to her. So that's how we loop them in on a need to know basis. But no, we don't make reports to law enforcement with details of the people involved.
Okay, thank you. That is really good that they don't get any identifiable information for folks who come to seek your services. That is wonderful. So I know you talked to us a little bit in the beginning about the process of an investigation. That was really helpful. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what happens when somebody comes to your office and makes a report about sexual assault, stalking, domestic violence, or discrimination? And I know you provided that the diagram in the beginning, and that was really helpful. So maybe talk a little bit about what happens from start to finish on a little bit more broader scale, if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two kind of ways this can happen. If the report's made by someone other than the person who experienced the assault, for example, then the first thing we will do is send out an email to that affected individual, the one who did receive the harm. And the email will let the person know that we've received a report. It doesn't say who made the report. We've received a report indicating that they may have experienced some form of harassment or misconduct, and let them know that we want to offer them support and resources first and foremost. So we provide the person information about our offices, resources both on and off campus that may be helpful to them depending on what they have experienced. And then we also offer in that email the opportunity for them to come in and talk to someone, usually either myself or Lacey Fox, if they want to talk about what happened. And that's where we kind of get into what I described as my role when we're doing that intake meeting and we're talking about possible resolution. There is also information in the email about how to file their formal complaint if that is what they want to do, where to find our policies and procedures if they want to look up that information themselves. And then at the end of that email, there's an option to, it says click here. And if they click on that and just hit send, it sends a blank email to Christy Roeder, who's our equity assistant. And that indicates to us that they do not want to be contacted again. So it explains that if you don't want to be contacted again by us about this, please just click here and we'll make a note. And so then we do not reach out. We don't do any follow-up or, so there's no pressure for anyone to come in and talk to us at any time. So if the report, like you said, is made by the person who directly experienced the assault, if possible, we have one of us, myself, Lacey, or Sybil, whoever is available, talk to the person right then. And we typically try to keep, even when we were doing in person, we would try to keep one person designated as on call so that we had someone available if needed. They wouldn't be scheduling their own meetings and not be available. If the person prefers to not talk right away, they need some time, they just want to let us know what happened and then kind of come back and go through that intake, we'll schedule something, if they want to do that at a future date. And then we go ahead with that intake meeting. So those are the two ways that we kind of get the process started. You can either come on in, make the report, or if someone else makes a report about another person, then we'll reach out and send that email.
Okay. And let's say somebody clicks that option, the click here option, that they don't necessarily want to be contacted about this in the future. Can that person still seek services at some point in the future when they feel ready?
Absolutely. And I think that email also says something about if you click here, we'll make a note in our records to not reach out and contact you anymore, but you're always welcome to reach back out to us if your situation changes or you change your mind. So definitely if, and that's happened actually, a few times. And so we make a note, we set it aside, and then, maybe in a few weeks, we might get an email again that says, I'd really like to maybe talk about what this process looks like, or I really need some help with academics because I am struggling. And so then we definitely, get a meeting set up and figure out what they need and what we can do.
Okay, thank you. That is great that
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
they're not ready in that moment, they can still come to you all as a resource and say, I know I wasn't ready then, but I'm ready now.
Yeah. And I would even add, it's also important if you need to seek supportive measures, if you need some assistance, any of those things that were listed on that webpage, you don't have to give us information about what happened. When I meet with someone who's interested in getting that kind of help, I just say, you can tell me as much or as little as you want. It's required that we just know that something happened. Obviously we can't offer it to everyone on campus, although sometimes maybe everyone needs it. I hope not. But, you don't have to give us details. You don't have to tell us what happened to get those assistance measures.
That is amazing. That's awesome that you don't have to share anything, just that you need supportive measures in place.
Yep.
Great. Well, Casey, we are close to the end and closing it out. So I have one final question for you.
Yes.
Is the Title IX office or Office of Affirmative Action a confidential resource on campus?
That is a very good question. And so, no, we are not and cannot be a confidential resource. And I'll explain why. We try to make sure that this is really clear because it gets, people get confused a lot, or you would tend to assume that things of this nature should be confidential, right? So the reason that we can't be is that in some cases, we may be required to take action even when that complainant, the person who experienced harm, does not want to participate. I'll give you a couple examples of when that would happen. For example, I may have touched on this a little bit. If the respondent is an employee of UMKC, we have a higher legal obligation to address behavior that our employees are committing and to stop them from potentially causing further harm. So even in a case where a complainant does not want an investigation, maybe they report sexual harassment by a coworker, we will still have to at least address what our policies are with that employee and address that there was a report. Now, we do try to maintain privacy as much as possible. In many cases, we will try to protect the identity of the complainant if it's not something, but by the nature of the report, they're going to figure it out. Or if it's a case where we think, okay, maybe we don't have to give them the explicit details of the report because it's not that egregious, but, and this complainant does not want them to know that they made a report. Maybe we can just put everyone in the department on notice, a reminder about these are our policies and here's what could happen if you are violating these policies, or do a training, something of that nature. That's one way that we can try to address it generally and still protect the privacy of the other person involved. Sometimes we can say we received a third-party report, if that's accurate, and we don't say who. Someone witnessed this, someone reported it. Those types of things, so that we're not giving away any identity if possible. And sometimes in some cases we can explicitly say, the person affected did not want us to take action. However, we have to in this case because we have a liability to make sure our employees are not violating the law and hurting people. So that can get tricky. And I try really, really hard to work with complainants and explain that to them, because there's certain things we kind of get put in between a rock and a hard space, because we want to protect people, but we also want to, recognize and respect autonomy, Another situation, I don't know if we have enough time, another situation where that might come up and has come up, if we get multiple reports from different people about one person committing the same similar types of violations, we may have a report of one person who's committed, sexual assault, and we get multiple people saying, oh, that happened to me. That also happened to me. Unfortunately, that has happened in the past. In those cases, we do have to act because we may be seeing a pattern of behavior. by an individual and it's affecting many people, we have an obligation to stop that from continuing. If they're our student and they are on our campus, they are bound by our policies, and then they should not, be acting in that manner. And that's why we have the ability and the obligation to step in and do something. Again, it doesn't mean the people who may have experienced the assault, they don't have to participate. No one is ever forced to participate. We may just have to use information that we received, from a previous report. And that's happened where we'll have something, we get a couple reports and then we get like a third report and we're like, okay, I know these two people didn't want us to do anything, but now we've got a third person who is also being affected. And so in those cases, what we'll do, we will reach out to all of the people who have been affected and let them know this is what has to happen. You don't have to participate, but you're welcome to if you want. And we can talk about what that looks like, because at that point, we just have to do something.
Right. And that's understandable.
Yeah. And so I will say, kind of in closing on that, there's supposed to be something else in this square here. So, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. But I'm going to switch over to confidential support. So we try really hard to promote the offices on campus that are confidential. So if someone is not sure if they want to proceed, they don't want to let anyone else know what happened, they can turn to these options, and we have Your Office, RISE, we have, counseling services. There's another counseling group over in the educational building. For faculty and staff, we have an ombuds. We work really hard in our mandatory reporter training when we're training employees to let them know, first of all, you need to tell people that are disclosing things to you that you're a mandated reporter. And if they don't want to have that information reported to us, then you need to give them information about these confidential offices, because those offices don't have to share any information and we would never know about what happened if that's how the person wants to go.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to know that there are resources on campus that folks can reach out to, or that we can share the information about these offices. So that way, if we find out any information, but the individual doesn't necessarily want to report, we can give them like, hey, here's some confidential resources on campus. You can go and talk to them. And if you decide at a later time that you'd like to speak or file a formal report or talk to law enforcement, whatever works for you, we can do that at a later date. But here's a first step.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Casey. I just want to take a minute to say thank you so much for being here and sharing this space with me. I want to thank everybody who attended. It's great. This has been so informational. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope everybody here learned something about the Title IX office, Office of Affirmative Action, and what exactly is Title IX. I know we've heard a lot about it, especially over the last couple months with the changes that occurred and started in August. And so this has been very informational. So thank you so much for partnering with us and being here and explaining everything in a wonderfully simplistic way. You hear about things, but it's good to actually know, what does this mean? How can we use this information? So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. Anyone who has questions, if you're seeing this now or later, feel free to email me. I'm always available to answer questions. So.
Thank you. And Kim provided the YouTube live stream, so that way, if anybody would like this information at a later date, or you'd like to share this Zoom meeting with other folks, you can provide them with that live stream and they will have access to that. So thank you all again for sharing this space with us today. We greatly appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either Casey or myself at any point in time. Thank you.